Hi everybody, and welcome to our screencast that will provide some background on Mesopotamian mythology. This is the first pantheon that we're going to look at in detail, and hopefully in this screencast you're going to learn a little bit about the cosmogony, the way that the Mesopotamians thought the universe was created, and also the theogony, their pantheon of gods and how the gods all related to each other. So when you're done watching, you want to have a sense of the historical nature of the EnumaElish, which is the primary text, what some people consider the actual oldest mythological narrative that we have, right up there with an epic poem called Gilgamesh. You want to have a sense of the psychology of the gods, and then also have a sense of how to do some literary interpretation. So here we go. The first thing that you want to think about is that the EnumaElish was actually created around 1100 BCE. And it was written on stone tablets in a language called cuneiform. And as you can tell from the fragments that are on the screen right here, we don't have the whole text. In fact, we have just some remnants of it that were discovered in 1849, these fragmented tablets. They weren't translated, their cuneiform wasn't translated until about 1857, and it was first published in around 1876, the 19th century. So again, like the other myths we've talked about, this was a narrative that was initially passed down by oral tradition. And we think that it was written down around 1100 BCE. And it was written down to celebrate a very historical event. To understand that historical event, you need to understand a little bit about what was going on in the Middle East around the 1100s. So first off, if you think about that geographical area, we're in this region of our world map. So right to the right of Egypt, we talked about Egyptian myths, and now we're going to move to the Euphrates River and the Tigris River. Now, this region was dominated by several different groups that we lump in a term Mesopotamia. You have the Sumerians, who were kind of in charge or dominant around 3200 BCE. They're the orange tab right there. You also then have the Akkadian Empire, which took precedence around the 2350s, and then the Babylonians took control around 1700 BCE. So you can see on this map how their empire expanded way beyond the initial Sumerian, Akkadian, and then they controlled quite a bit of land. Back to these different cities that you see on the map right here. Now, this region, the Sumerians, the Akkadians, and the Babylonians, shared similar mythological gods. They knew about each other's gods, but just the same way that if you think of Catholic schools today, there might be a school devoted to St. Gabe's or St. Matthew's, or even some schools dedicated to the Virgin Mary. It's the same Catholic religion, but different parishes decide to pay homage to different saints. The same is true for the Mesopotamian gods. We're going to learn about the pantheon, and each city chose a favorite god that they felt would be the most powerful. Some of the gods that you're going to learn about are Anu and Elu and Marduk. Now, Marduk's the guy that you need to know in order to get the EnumaElish, again, that main myth. He was the main god of Babylon. And what would happen is that these cities that you're seeing on this map right here would get in fights with each other, and they would steal each other's artifacts. So the statue of Marduk, which was a very famous statue that was housed in Babylon, was stolen by one of these other city-states, and then the battles would go on. Eventually, in 1100 BCE, the Babylonians were victorious and returned the statue back to that city. So in celebration, people believe that the EnumaElish, this myth that we're going to be learning about, was written down in order to celebrate the god Marduk, who is thought to be then the most important god in the region. Well, how did that happen? So first off, a couple things about the tablets. As I mentioned before, they were written in cuneiform and found in 1849, and a translation was published in 1876. And what the story tells is a background of what the Mesopotamians thought of as responsible for their existence, that cosmogony. And it starts off when on high. In fact, EnumaElish translates to when on high the first few words of the poem which you see in front of you. When the skies on high were not yet named, nor earth below pronounced by name, Apsu, the first one, their begetter, and Tiamat, who bore them all, had mixed their waters together, but had not formed pastures, nor discovered reed beds, when no god whatever had been brought into being, nor names pronounced, nor destinies decreed, then gods were born within them. All right, pretty standard fare. You might find connections with the Japanese myth that we spoke about, the Chinese myth, but then things get a little bit more interesting. So we're going to take a break, and I'm going to turn you over to an animation video that's going to describe to you a brief summary of the Enuma Elish. And then I'm going to highlight a few more points that will help you when you actually read this text. So we're going to transition now.
Before anything had a name, before there was firm ground, or sky, or the sun and moon, there was Apsu, the sweet water sea, and Tiamat, the salt water sea. When these two seas mingled, they created the gods Lamu and Lahamu, who rose from the silt at the edge of the water. When Lamu and Lahamu joined, they created the great gods Anshar, Kishar, and Anu. From this generation of gods, there arose mighty Ea and his many brothers. Ea and his brothers were restless. They surged over the waters day and night. Neither Apsu nor Tiamat could get any rest. They tried to plead with the gods to tread softly, but powerful Ea didn't hear them. Apsu decided the only way to have some peace was to destroy Ea and his brothers. He began to plot their demise with some of the first-generation gods. But Ea heard of their plans and struck him down first. This began a war among the gods. Tiamat was furious that her mate was killed, and she began producing great and ferocious monsters to slay Ea and his brothers. She created poisonous dragons and demons and serpents. She created the viper, the sphinx, the lion, the mad dog, and scorpion man. The chief of them all was called Kingu. He led the army of Tiamat's monsters into heaven against Ea and his brothers to avenge Apsu's death. While Tiamat fashioned her army, Ea and the goddess Damkina created the great god Marduk. His eyes flashed with lightning, and when he spoke, he breathed fire. He was fearless and radiant. The gods cowered before him. "You are the great sun," they cried. Ea and the gods told him of the advancing army. They needed his help to defeat them. "I will fight for you, but after the war is over, I shall rule the universe on high." The gods agreed. Marduk made ready for battle. He gathered the four winds to clear the path to Tiamat. Marduk burst out of the sky in his flaming chariot, pulled by his team Killer, Crusher, Unyielder, and Fleet. He held the royal scepter and ring covered in golden armor. He rode into battle bearing his bow and arrows and a mighty thunderbolt. Marduk was glorious to behold. He struck fear in the hearts of all Tiamat's brood. The sea waters of Tiamat swirled together and formed a vast and fearsome dragon. She opened her mouth wide to scream. Before she could utter a word, Marduk cast a hurricane into her mouth. She swallowed it, and the hurricane almost burst her apart from the inside. Before she could cast a single spell, Marduk let one of his arrows fly. It cut her neatly in half. Tiamat's monsters trembled as she died. Marduk raised half of her body to the heavens to form the sky, and the other half formed the earth. Marduk was victorious, and now the undisputed king of the universe. No one ever questioned his rule. He created the days of the year, the planets and their paths in the heavens, the stars and their constellations, and the moon and her moods. He became the sun and gave all the gods their responsibilities. After a time, he decided to create a creature that could serve the gods and bear the burden of hard work looking after the earth. Marduk first created a structure from bone left over from the bones of the dead monsters from the war. Then he formed the flesh around it and breathed life into it. Man was given his name. He took up residence on the earth, while the gods ascended to heaven. Thus the gods were freed from eternal labor.
Hope that you enjoyed the animated version of the myth, and I know you know the story, but I want to highlight a few of the components so that when you read the Enuma Elish it makes sense. So first off, you have the male Apsu and female Tiamat, freshwater and saltwater. They're going to be the main gods, like the parent gods. They have their descendants, Lakmu and Lakamu, who are not important at all. Don't worry about them. They have in turn Anshar and Kishar, siblings who, of course, because we're in a pantheon and siblings marry each other and procreate, they are going to create one important god, Anu. Now, Anu is going to be associated with the sky, and in some of those city-states that we looked at, he's going to be the main dude, the person that people pray to and think is the supreme divinity. Now, Anu has two sons, Ea, who you're going to read about in the Enuma Elish, and Elu. Now, in many Mesopotamian cities, Enlil, also known as Enlil, is a main god. Ea is the brother who's like the trickster figure. He's associated with the water, and he's going to be important in the Enuma Elish. Ea gets together with Dumkina, and they have Marduk. Remember, Marduk is the favorite god of Babylon, and so the story that you're going to read is going to describe why Marduk is the best. Now you see on the left-hand side here a real statue that was found at some Babylon ruins, and then on the right is a cartoonist rendition. Now the things that are next to Marduk are going to make sense in just a minute, but a couple more things that we want to highlight. Now again, back to that regional city-state, depending on which city that you lived in the area, you might think Anu was a chief god, Enlil or Enlil would have been important for you, or Ea. And that might have been impacted of where you lived. If you live closer to water, you might pray to Ea. If you lived in the mountains, you might pray to Anu. Now, as stated in the video that you saw, Apsu gets really ticked that his sons are making a lot of noise and that they're screwing around. And so he decides to wage war, and Ea is responsible for Apsu's demise. But this is where things get interesting, and what I want you to try to make some connections with some of the other stories we've been talking about. Because Tiamat, who you'll see in the story, is originally the mother goddess and wants to protect her great-grandchildren, turns into a monster, decides that her lover/son Kingu should be in charge, and she gives him the Tablets of Destiny. Now, whoever holds the Tablets of Destiny rules the world. For those of you who like to watch the Avengers and the Endgame, you know those rings that, I forget the guy's name, but you know who I'm talking about. And if you have all the rings, you get to control everything. Well, the Tablets of Destiny are just like that. And so when Kingu has them, and when Tiamat turns into a dragon monster, ooh, the younger gods are freaked out. In fact, Ea says there's no way that I can defeat this very scary monster, who, remember, used to be his great-great-grandmother. So what do? They turn to Marduk. This is another quote from the epic poem that you're going to read. My own utterance shall fix fate instead of you. Whatever I create shall never be altered. The decree of my lips shall never be revoked, never changed. This is what Marduk says before he agrees to help them. Basically saying, if I'm going to help you, you better make me the king of kings. All right. These are some pictures that depict Marduk slaying the dragon monster depicted as a serpent. Think about that mother goddess serpent thing we've been talking about. And Marduk wins. Now, when you read the story, ask yourself why he's able to win. He's strong, but it's not just his brute strength that helps him become victorious. After Marduk wins, Tiamat, she gets sliced in half, like a cockle shell. Half of her becomes the roof, 2 ribs become lands of east and west, her liver becomes a star, her spittle becomes the cloud, her her eyes become the rivers, and tail the Milky Way, and even her crotch is used to support the sky. That's one wacky world. Think about what other gods have been split apart in order to make the world that we see around us. Last thing, after the battle, Marduk is supreme. He gains the tablets of destiny, hence the disc that you see on the cartoon. Kingu becomes just a sidebar. He makes the gods promise to build him a beautiful dwelling place in Babylon, and then decides, well, Kingu, we deserve to punish him, so they slay him, and out of his blood comes human beings, who the Mesopotamian gods think will do all the work so they can live in luxury. Now, I just gave you a summary of the Enuma Elish, but you're going to read it this weekend. And as you do so, look for themes. You kind of know the plot, but I want you to see what are the psychological themes or nuances that you can pull out, the way that the characters relate to each other, what larger than life human nature issues come out, what cool questions to consider might you find. Look for connections to other creation myths, and then who is the most interesting character to you. On Monday, we're going to do an exercise where you're going to look for some themes in the story that might reflect some insights about human nature. So you want to be ready to go and ready to refer to the text. All right, I think you're good to go. Enjoy the Enuma Elish, and I will see you on Monday.